Everyone always sees the beautiful and glamorous side of Hollywood, but few know the price of success and its bizarre, dark side. When I stepped off the bus, the first thing I noticed was the smell. Los Angeles had an odor unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was like perfume mixed with something burning, maybe the hot asphalt, maybe the exhaust from cars roaring like beasts around me. But to me, it smelled like a dream. My dream. I clutched my suitcase tightly as I checked the address on my phone. The building was on a side street, far from the grand avenues I'd always seen in the movies. It was nothing like I'd imagined. The facade was worn, the windows clouded with ancient dust, and the main door had a lock that barely worked. But that tiny apartment was my first step. I walked in and climbed the 2 flights of stairs to the 4th floor. There was no elevator, and the heat in the stifling hallway made my shirt stick to my back. When I finally unlocked the door, I found a tiny room with faded beige walls and the smell of mildew. A single bed pushed against the wall, and a chipped desk in the corner were the only pieces of furniture. "Welcome to your new life, Jenna," I muttered to myself, trying to muster a smile. That night, lying on the thin mattress, I could hardly sleep. The city seemed alive, even in the middle of the night. Sirens, laughter, hurried footsteps. It was a constant hum, like a whisper telling me, "There's no rest here. Work hard or go home." In the days that followed, I signed up for every audition I could find: indie films, commercials, even student film projects. Every waiting room felt like an endless parade of young hopefuls who, like me, believed they could be the next big star. Some auditions ended in seconds, with a cold smile and a "thank you, we'll be in touch." Others were more humiliating, with directors casting bored glances or asking me to put more emotion into ridiculous lines. The loneliness began to weigh on me. I didn't know anyone, and the messages from home grew less frequent. My parents still supported me, but I could hear the skepticism in their voices when they asked, "How's it going out there?" I lied, of course. "Everything's great. I'm getting lots of auditions." After weeks, my savings began to dwindle. That's when I got the call that changed everything. "Jenna Hart?" The voice on the other end was firm and professional. "Yes, this is she. My name is Rebecca Turner. I'm an agent with Starlight Management. We've been following your profile and would like to schedule a meeting to discuss your career." I froze, barely able to believe it. Starlight Management was legendary. They represented some of the biggest names in Hollywood. For a moment, I thought it might be a prank, but Rebecca sounded far too confident to be fake. "Of course, I'd love to," I replied enthusiastically, trying to hide my nerves. "Great. Meet me tomorrow at 2 p.m. at our office. I'll send you the address. Bring any materials you have. Photos, portfolio, that sort of thing." That night, I barely slept. I spent hours picking the right outfit, rehearsing what I'd say, and imagining how the meeting might go. This was the opportunity I'd been waiting for, and I was ready to do whatever it took to seize it. The next day, I arrived at the address. The Starlight Management building was imposing. Mirrored glass reflected the sunlight, and the lobby looked like something out of a movie. Gleaming marble floors, immaculate flower arrangements, and a receptionist who looked more like a model than an employee. Rebecca was an imposing woman. Blonde, with short hair and an impeccable suit, she greeted me with a calculated smile. The meeting was quick, almost too formal. She asked about my experience, my goals, and jotted down notes on a tablet. "You have potential, Jenna," she said as she signed something on a form. "But you need guidance. At Starlight, we turn dreams into reality. If you're willing to work hard and follow our guidance, I can guarantee you'll become a star." My heart raced. I signed the contract without a second thought. I had no idea that in that moment, I was opening the door to something much bigger and darker than I could ever imagine. When Rebecca called me for a meeting the next day, I thought it would just be another formal chat. But as I stepped into the room, something felt different. The atmosphere was more serious, more tense. Rebecca sat in her leather chair, a tablet in hand, and a folder on the table in front of her. Beside her sat a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, his expression unreadable as he observed me like he was assessing more than just my appearance. "Jenna, this is an important step in your career," Rebecca began, locking eyes with me. "Now that you're part of Starlight Management, there are certain guidelines we expect you to follow." She opened the folder and slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a list of rules, printed on paper that seemed unnecessarily official. I picked it up, and the first lines made me frown. Never question your superiors. Obey all requests immediately, without hesitation. Be available for any opportunity, at any time. Always maintain a smile, no matter the circumstances. Keep your body in shape, and always look your best. It's a code of conduct, Rebecca explained as I read. These rules are in place to ensure you reach your maximum potential. I didn't question it. They seemed like standard rules for such a competitive industry. Rebecca continued her explanation. Additionally, there are a few extra details. When you're invited to specific events, we'll follow a color-coded system. You'll receive instructions on the appropriate attire and expected behavior. And of course, certain topics are off-limits. Politics, religion, personal matters. Those things can damage your image. I nodded. It didn't seem like a big deal, though a bit restrictive. "Is that all?" I asked, trying to sound confident. Rebecca and the man exchanged a brief glance. He spoke first, his voice low and almost mechanical. "This is just the beginning." Days later, I received my first major assignment, a party at a Beverly Hills mansion. Rebecca handed me a red dress. "You'll wear this," she said, leaving no room for negotiation. "And remember, be cordial, but not overly approachable. It's important to stand out, but not seem desperate." I arrived at the event at the designated time, 10 p.m. The mansion was a monument to excessive luxury, with marble columns, enormous chandeliers, and uniformed security guards at every corner. The invitation stated it was a private party hosted by one of Hollywood's most influential producers, but it didn't mention any names. The atmosphere was almost surreal. Celebrities I'd only seen in magazines and movies chatted in small groups, laughing and sipping champagne as if they existed in a world completely separate from mine. The people seemed to size each other up with sharp looks, as if every interaction was a power game disguised as casual conversation. Rebecca introduced me to a few people, her smile flawless as always. Then, she left me alone, saying only, "Enjoy the night." I felt out of place, but tried to keep my composure. I wandered through the room, observing the conversations and trying to pick up on the tone. That's when I noticed something was off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but the looks I received weren't normal. Some were curious, others evaluative, but a certain group seemed outright hostile. Not in an obvious way, but with smiles that didn't reach their eyes and comments that felt like veiled provocations. An elegant woman wearing a long silver dress approached me. She held a glass of red wine and had a smile that looked carved from marble. "You're new here, aren't you?" she asked, her voice too sweet to be genuine. "Yes, it's my first time," I replied, trying to sound confident. "Oh, so they're testing you?" I frowned. "Testing me?" She laughed, but there was something sharp in her laughter. "Oh, darling, we're all tested here one way or another. Just be careful not to fail." Before I could ask what she meant, she walked away, vanishing into the crowd. Later that night, I was approached by a tall man with gray hair and dark eyes. He introduced himself as Edward, but didn't elaborate on who he was or what he did. He started with generic questions: where I was from, why I wanted to act. But as the conversation progressed, the questions became more intrusive. Would you do anything for your career, Jenna? I hesitated. I think so, as long as it's something I consider ethical. He smiled in a way that made me uncomfortable. Interesting. You still believe in ethics in a place like this? The conversation was cut short when Rebecca appeared, pulling me away. It's time to go, she said, gripping my arm tighter than necessary. In the car, she glanced at me through the rearview mirror. How was your first experience? Confusing, I admitted. The people are different. Rebecca didn't reply immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was colder. You need to understand, Jenna. This world is about who's willing to go further. Success isn't just about talent. It's about obedience. It's about sacrifice. I wasn't sure what she meant, but I felt I was about to find out. It started slowly, almost imperceptibly. First, there was an invitation to a dinner. Rebecca said it was important. Directors like to meet new talent in relaxed settings. It's no big deal. Just be yourself. At first, I was excited. Maybe it was an opportunity to show my charm outside of auditions, to get noticed. I arrived at the restaurant on time, wearing the dress Rebecca had picked for me. It was simple yet elegant, something that said, I'm approachable, but sophisticated. The venue felt like something out of a movie, low lighting, soft ambient music, and waiters who moved like dancers. Rebecca wasn't there. Instead, I was greeted by a man who introduced himself as Greg, a middle-aged director with an easy smile and restless eyes. He led me to a table in the back, where 2 other men were already seated. They didn't bother hiding the fact that they were scrutinizing me, evaluating my every move as if I were a product on display. Small talk followed. They asked about my life, my hometown, why I wanted to be an actress. I answered mechanically, smiling as I thought I should, even when their comments began to feel inappropriate. You have a beautiful smile, one of them said, leaning across the table. Thank you, I replied, trying to sound gracious but feeling exposed. That was just the beginning. The engagements started piling up. The agency sent me to exclusive events, private parties, and meetings that weren't in my contract. Rebecca always had a justification. This is important for building your network, or these are the people who can make your career. One day, I was invited to a party at an isolated mansion in the hills of Malibu. Rebecca stressed the importance of being punctual and following all instructions. Bring your best energy, Jenna. This is a unique opportunity. The mansion was extravagant, even by the standards I was starting to get used to. Glass walls, modern sculptures scattered throughout the halls, and a grand piano in the center of an absurdly large room. The host was a renowned producer, whose name was attached to a dozen award-winning films. As soon as I arrived, I noticed the atmosphere was different. There wasn't the usual buzz of a party. Everything was quieter, almost intimate. Rebecca greeted me at the entrance and led me to a smaller room where a group of men was already gathered. They all seemed relaxed, holding glasses of whiskey and cigars. Jenna, Rebecca said with a smile that felt more like a warning than a greeting. They want to meet you. At first I thought it would just be a conversation, but soon things took a strange turn. One of the men asked me to recite some lines from an improvised script. It was a flirtatious scene, something harmless. I did my best, feeling the weight of their eyes on me. No, more emotion, one of them said, laughing as he took a sip of his drink. You need to seem more vulnerable, another added, gesturing as if he were directing a scene. They began giving orders, each more specific than the last. The scene morphed into something intimate and uncomfortable, teetering on the edge of vulgarity. I wanted to stop, but I knew Rebecca was there, watching everything. Her expression said one thing. Keep going. This is part of the process. My face burned with shame as I complied. Their laughter, the whispered comments between them, the way they looked at me, it was humiliating. When they finally finished, they gave me a lazy round of applause, as if I were a toy that had performed its function. When I left the room, I felt a lump in my throat. I went to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and looked in the mirror. The woman staring back at me felt like a stranger. The next day, I confronted Rebecca. "I don't want to go through that again," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She sighed, as if tired of hearing something she'd expected. "Jenna, I understand it was uncomfortable, but this is part of it. You don't understand how much these people can open doors for you. What happened was an investment." "An investment?" My voice trembled with indignation. "I was humiliated." Rebecca crossed her arms, unbothered. "Hollywood isn't a place for the weak. If you want to shine, you have to be willing to sacrifice. Do you think the biggest stars got where they are on talent alone? No, they understood how to play the game." I fell silent. Part of me wanted to scream, but another part knew she was right. This was the price of my dream, and I was already too deep to walk away. Rebecca placed a hand on my shoulder, almost maternal. "Trust me, Jenna. If you keep doing as I say, you'll be on top soon enough." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that all the discomfort, all the shame, would be worth it in the end. The following week, when I received an invitation to another party, Rebecca seemed more excited than usual. "This is a turning point for you, Jenna," she said, placing a gold envelope on the table. The host's name was embossed in stylized letters, a world-famous rapper known for his chart-topping hits, extravagant lifestyle, and even more extravagant, parties. "This is the kind of event that few people get access to," she continued. "Big celebrities, executives, investors. This is where the careers you dream of are made." I knew what it meant. Another opportunity to impress the right people, to play the game. But ever since that humiliating night at the producer's mansion, something inside me hesitated. Still, I smiled, feigning enthusiasm, and accepted the invitation. The party was in a secluded mansion on the outskirts of Los Angeles, surrounded by hills and shrouded in a mist that seemed to conceal what was about to unfold. The entrance was guarded by towering security personnel checking guest names on tablets. When I finally passed through the gates, I saw a parade of luxury cars parked outside, each one more extravagant than the last. Inside, the mansion was a spectacle of decadence. Giant chandeliers lit rooms filled with people, deafening music filled the air, and there was an abundance of drinks, drugs, and something else. Something I couldn't quite identify, but that lingered in the atmosphere like an invisible threat. Rebecca was there, of course, but she quickly disappeared into the crowd. "Enjoy yourself," she said before leaving, as if it were easy to feel comfortable in that chaos. At first, I just observed, trying to appear composed while feeling increasingly out of place. People laughed loudly, drank as if the night would never end, and behaved in ways that crossed any sense of normalcy. Near the pool, a group was playing some kind of game, a mix of dares and public humiliation. I saw a woman kneeling before a man as the others laughed and clapped, and one participant even shoved someone into the pool while shouting something unintelligible. Inside the house, the hallways were filled with smaller, more intimate groups. Drug use was blatant, as casual as pouring a glass of champagne. In one dimly lit room, I witnessed something even more disturbing. A tangled group caught in a wild orgy, their bodies glistening under the low light, their voices blending with the music's heavy beat. I tried to stay away, but every step seemed to pull me closer to something stranger. In one of the smaller rooms, away from the main commotion, I noticed a woman who stood out. She wore a black dress that seemed to be made of shadow itself, and her eyes glinted as if she held secrets no one else there could fathom. "You're new," she said bluntly, taking a sip of her wine. "Is it that obvious?" I tried to joke, but my voice came out hesitant. "They always know," she replied with an enigmatic smile. "Everyone's watching you, waiting to see how you'll handle yourself. That's how things work here." Before I could ask what she meant, she leaned in, her voice a whisper heavy with an unbearable weight. "Do you know about the restricted rooms?" I stayed silent, confused. She gestured toward a hallway guarded by 2 imposing men. "That's where the real things happen. All this," she waved her hand at the room around us, "is just the surface. The real party is back there." I tried to press her for more information, but she laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "Tonight, there will be a baptism," she said with the same casualness as someone commenting on the weather. "A baptism?" I asked, feeling a shiver run down my spine. "Yes, for a new pop artist and an actress. It's a ritual. Something unforgettable." "What kind of ritual?" She laughed again, but this time the sound was cruel, almost malevolent. "You'll find out soon enough," she said, before getting up and vanishing into the crowd. As I tried to process what I'd just heard, Rebecca found me. There was an edge of impatience in her demeanor, as if she knew I was avoiding what was expected of me. "You need to stop wandering off alone, Jenna," she said quietly but firmly. "People here are watching you. This is your moment to prove you belong in this world." "Rebecca, I don't feel comfortable. This is all too much." "Comfort has nothing to do with success," she snapped. "Everyone who reaches the top goes through this. Don't break the rules. If you do, there are no second chances." There was something in her gaze, something that reminded me I was playing a game whose rules I didn't understand. The party continued around me, but it felt distant. Every laugh, every shout, every note of music was muffled by the buzzing in my mind. Rebecca was right. I wanted success. I wanted to achieve my dreams. But that night, I started to wonder, at what cost? As I watched the doors to the restricted rooms open and close, a chill ran down my spine. Something was happening back there, something that could change who I was forever. Deep down, I knew that sooner or later, I would have to decide if I was willing to step through those doors. Rebecca was right about one thing. Everyone was watching me. But the question that haunted me was why? These weren't just evaluating stares. It felt like they were waiting for something, like predators ready to pounce at the slightest misstep. I tried to push the thought away. I walked toward the exit, my breathing heavy, as if something invisible were pressing down on my chest. On the way, I crossed paths with Rebecca. She gave me a scrutinizing look, as if she were checking whether I was still up to their expectations. "Jenna, it's time to go," she said. I didn't argue. In the car, Rebecca didn't say much, but her tone was more serious than usual. "The night was a success, but we have something more important to discuss. Tomorrow, I need you to come to the office." I nodded, asking no questions. My mind was too overwhelmed to try to decipher her intentions. The next morning, I arrived at the Starlight building with a growing sense of unease. Rebecca was already waiting in the meeting room, a folder on the table. As I walked in, she shut the door behind me and gestured for me to sit down. "Jenna, we have a sensitive situation. We need you to handle it discreetly," she began, opening the folder. Inside were photos of a young woman, beautiful, with a radiant smile and perfectly styled brown hair. "This is Emma," Rebecca continued. "She's being considered for a major role, the same role we want for you. She's talented, but she's on the wrong path, and she's with a rival agency." I looked at Rebecca, feeling a sense of foreboding. "What does this have to do with me?" "We need to ensure Emma is disqualified." Rebecca said calmly. You'll approach her, gain her trust. Then, you'll plant this in her apartment. Rebecca placed a small envelope in front of me. I opened it to find papers and tiny packets, fake evidence suggesting Emma was involved in drug trafficking. You want me to do this? I asked. Yes, Jenna. It's simple. Emma trusts people too easily. One visit, a friendly chat, and it's done. No one will get hurt, except her. And if they find out? Rebecca smiled as cold as ever. They won't. And even if they do, Emma will already be out of the picture. The role will be yours. My first instinct was to refuse, but Rebecca's gaze held me in place. I knew that if I said no, I'd be discarded. That afternoon, I followed the plan. Using a contact from the agency, I got Emma's number and came up with an excuse to meet her. A shared interest in working together. A fake admiration for her work. As expected, she was receptive. We met at ATCR, a busy cafe. Emma was friendly, perhaps even naive, the kind of person who seemed to believe the best about others. We talked for nearly an hour, and by the end, she invited me to see her apartment. When I arrived, she was so at ease that she barely noticed as I looked around. It was a small but beautifully decorated space, with a personal touch that contrasted sharply with the cold, impersonal environments I was getting used to navigating. While she went to the kitchen to grab something to drink, I took my chance. I pulled the envelope out of my bag and hid it in a drawer in the hallway cabinet. My hands were trembling, and for a moment, I thought I wouldn't be able to do it. When Emma returned, I kept smiling, pretending nothing had happened. A short time later, I made up an excuse to leave. 2 days later, I got the news. Rebecca called me to the office, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Emma was arrested this morning, she said, handing me a printed article from a news site. The evidence found in her apartment was more than enough to disqualify her from the project. Congratulations, Jenna. The role is yours. I looked at the paper, but the words seemed blurred. My mind drifted to Emma's smile, the way she had welcomed me into her home without any suspicion. Is this permanent? I asked, hesitant. Rebecca chuckled softly. Nothing is permanent in Hollywood, darling, but you've just ensured you're one step ahead. I should have been happy. This was my moment to rise, proof that my efforts were finally paying off. But all I felt was a growing emptiness. That night, sitting alone in my apartment, I opened the script. The story was good, the kind of film that could catapult me to stardom. But the guilt was a weight I couldn't ignore. For the first time, I questioned whether it was all worth it. Yet even with that doubt burning in my mind, I kept going. The allure of imminent success still burned brighter than my remorse. Deep down, I knew Rebecca and Starlight would drag me even deeper. The emptiness lingered. Even after landing the role, the weight of what I had done to get it followed me like a shadow. Rebecca, however, seemed more pleased than ever. "You're doing well," she said during one of our meetings. But that day, her expression shifted to something more serious. "We need to discuss an important engagement," she began, sliding a black envelope across the table. "A private meeting with a group of producers. They want to meet you." My stomach churned. Every time Rebecca mentioned an important engagement, I knew it would be something that tested my limits even further. "What's the meeting about?" I asked, trying to hide my discomfort. "It's a formality," she replied with her calculated smile. "They like to meet the talent they're investing in. Trust me, it's a necessary step to solidify your position." I nodded, reluctant. There was no choice. The meeting was scheduled for that same evening at a luxury hotel in downtown Los Angeles. The lobby sparkled with marble and gold, and the gazes of those around me seemed to follow my every move. Rebecca met me in the lobby and led me to a private room on the top floor. When the door opened, I found a group of men seated around a long table. They were impeccably dressed, exuding power in their posture, and cold, assessing stares. "Jenna, These are some of the top producers in the industry, Rebecca said as I tried to maintain my smile. They asked questions about my experience, my goals, and my vision for the future. The conversation felt formal, but there was an underlying tension in the air I couldn't ignore. When the questions ended, one of them placed a thick document on the table. Before we proceed, we need you to sign this. I picked up the document, my hands slightly trembling. It was a confidentiality agreement. The clauses were complicated, but certain words stood out, making my stomach sink. Irrevocable, absolute secrecy, severe penalties. What exactly am I signing? I asked. One of the men, the oldest, and clearly the leader of the group, smiled in a way that made me want to run. Nothing too serious, Jenna. Just an agreement to ensure that what happens in our meetings stays between us. This is standard in the industry. Rebecca gave me a warning look. I knew I couldn't refuse. I picked up the pen and signed, feeling as though I was agreeing to something far more dangerous than a simple contract. Excellent, the man said, tucking the document away. Now, let's have dinner. Dinner was served in an adjoining room, where the atmosphere was even more uncomfortable. The producers chatted among themselves, barely acknowledging me until one of them started asking increasingly personal questions. "Do you have anyone waiting for you at home?" he asked, smiling as if it were an innocent question. "No, I'm alone," I replied, trying to conceal my irritation. Another producer chuckled, a low and condescending sound. "That's good. Loneliness can be useful in this industry. Fewer distractions." The real horror began after dinner. One of the men, a veteran actor I recognized from countless classic films, approached me while the others laughed and toasted. He was clearly the center of attention, the kind of person everyone there seemed to revere. "Rebecca says you're promising," he said, stepping closer than I would have liked. "Let me give you some advice. The talents who rise to the top are the ones who know how to meet expectations." Before I could respond, he placed a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Why don't we get a little more comfortable?" I looked to Rebecca, but she avoided my gaze, as if she already knew what was happening. "Excuse me?" I tried to say, stepping back, but the actor grabbed my arm firmly. "Don't be shy," he insisted, his voice low but loaded with authority. "After all, we're here to help you, aren't we?" He slid his other hand down to my chest, groping me. The room seemed to close in, the air growing heavier. I felt trapped, cornered by their stares and Rebecca's silent expectation. When he finally let go, I hurried to the bathroom and splashed water on my face, trying to hold back tears. The reflection in the mirror showed a version of me I barely recognized. Tired, scared, ashamed. After what felt like hours, the meeting ended. On the drive back, Rebecca finally broke the silence. "I know it was hard," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "But that's how things work. Everyone goes through it." "Everyone?" I whispered. "The ones who make it to the top, yes," she replied, looking at me through the rearview mirror. "You're almost there, Jenna. Don't give up now." I came home feeling like I was in a trance. I kicked off my shoes, collapsed on the couch and stared at the ceiling. Rebecca's words echoed in my head. "Everyone goes through this. You're almost there." But that night, a doubt settled within me, stronger than ever. What was I willing to lose to achieve success? And worse, how much of myself had I already lost in the process? After that degrading meeting, I could barely sleep. The thought that it was only the beginning gnawed at my mind, but Rebecca seemed either unaware of or indifferent to my growing unease. It wasn't long before she summoned me again. This time, there was no pretense of excitement or her usual mask of professionalism. When I entered the room, she was serious, her hands folded on the table, like someone about to deliver an ultimatum. "Jenna, "You've proven your worth over the past few weeks," she began, cutting straight to the point. "Now it's time to take the next step. There's an inner circle in Hollywood, reserved only for those who truly have potential. You've been chosen to join." "Chosen?" I asked. "This isn't an invitation," she replied curtly. "It's an opportunity, and you must accept." My throat went dry. Rebecca gave me that piercing look that seemed to see through every hesitation I had. "When I say this can change your life, I mean it. Many wish for this, but few are considered." I nodded, even though everything inside me screamed to refuse. On the night of my initiation, Rebecca picked me up personally. She handed me a simple black dress and strict instructions. Don't eat anything during the day and bring a meaningful personal object to leave as an offering. It made no sense, but the thought of breaking any rule terrified me more than following them. The location was a secluded estate, hidden among the hills of Malibu. Unlike the extravagant mansions where the parties were held, this house felt old, almost out of place. There were no visible security guards, but the oppressive atmosphere made it clear that I shouldn't be there without permission. Rebecca led me to a large, dark hall lit only by candles. A group of people was already there, all dressed in black, their expressions unreadable. Some were familiar faces, actors, singers, directors, executives, but no one seemed inclined to speak. In the center of the hall, a long table was covered with symbolic items: jewelry, photographs, watches, even pages torn from diaries. Rebecca gestured silently, and I understood it was my turn. I placed a bracelet my mother had given me years ago on the table, feeling a tightness in my chest as I stepped back. "It's a symbol of sacrifice," Rebecca whispered, as if reading my thoughts. The ceremony began solemnly. An older man, who seemed to lead the group, spoke in a language I didn't recognize. The people around me responded in unison, as if reciting something they had long memorized. I remained silent, trying not to seem out of place. Then the veteran actress entered. She was a Hollywood legend, someone I had grown up admiring. Dressed in white, she looked out of place in the somber environment. Her face was serene, but her eyes carried something that made me shudder, a deep sadness, almost resignation. The leader guided her to the center of the room, where a circle had been, drawn on the floor with some kind of white powder. She knelt without hesitation as the group began chanting a low, unsettling melody. What happened next was indescribable. The leader spoke louder and louder, his words reverberating through the hall, while the actress seemed to fall into a trance. The candles flickered violently, and the air grew heavier, as if something unseen was happening. Suddenly, she collapsed to the floor, her body convulsing violently before going completely still. No one reacted. It was as if this were expected. Rebecca, standing beside me, didn't flinch, and I forced myself to do the same. The ceremony ended soon after, and the woman was carried out without a word. In the following days, I searched for news about the actress. She had disappeared. There was no mention of her last appearance, no official statement, nothing. It was as if she had never existed. I asked Rebecca about it, but she gave me a sharp look. "Don't ask about things you're not ready to understand, Jenna." It stayed with me. The ceremony, the disappearance, the increasingly bizarre rules, the fasting, the offerings, the suffocating atmosphere of the meetings. Everything was becoming harder to endure, yet escaping felt impossible. Rebecca kept reminding me, "You're almost there." But each step forward felt more like a plunge into something I could never return from. Deep down, I knew that once I crossed that final line, there would be nothing left of who I used to be. The weeks after the ceremony with the veteran actress were a blur of discomfort and tension. Rebecca continued to push me, always talking about my rise and how grateful I should be for the opportunities. But deep down, something inside me was changing, a growing sense that every step was taking me further from who I really was. One night, I received a message from her. It contained only an address and a time. 10 p.m. No explanation, just the instruction to be ready. "It's the next stage," she said when I questioned her later. "A ritual that symbolizes your commitment to the circle. You've been chosen. You can't refuse." The location was even more isolated than the previous ones. Rebecca picked me up herself, driving in silence for nearly an hour along a narrow, winding road until we reached a secluded property hidden among the mountains. It wasn't a luxurious, mansion-like before. It looked more like an ancient temple, with weathered stone columns and enigmatic statues barely visible under the moonlight. The air was cold and heavy with an oppressive energy. As soon as we entered, I saw that the group was already gathered. The same people from the inner circle, all dressed in black, stood around an altar in the center of the hall. A small fire burned in the background. This time, there were no symbolic items on the table, only a large symbol etched into the floor. It looked like a circle intertwined with lines and runes. I had never seen anything like it, but just looking at it filled me with a deep unease. The leader, the same man who had conducted the previous ceremonies, began to speak. His tone was low, but every word seemed to echo, as if the room itself amplified his voice. He spoke of unity, sacrifice, and unwavering loyalty. "Tonight," he said, his eyes piercing into each of us, "you become part of something greater, something eternal." Rebecca handed me a small blade and whispered, "You must follow his instructions, without hesitation." I held the blade, cold and heavy in my hand. Before I could process what was happening, the leader began calling names one by one. Each person in the circle walked to the altar, cut the palm of their hand with the blade, and let their blood drip onto the symbol. On the floor, the fire in the background seemed to react, burning more intensely with each drop. When my name was called, my heart raced. Rebecca gave me a gentle nudge, pushing me forward. I walked slowly to the altar, feeling everyone's eyes on me. My hand trembled as I pressed the blade against my skin, but I knew refusing wasn't an option. When the blood began to flow, the symbol on the floor seemed to glow, as if absorbing my offering. "Now mark yourself," the leader commanded, extending a small iron tool heated to glowing with the same symbol engraved on it. I hesitated, but Rebecca whispered again, "You must. It's the price to enter." Gritting my teeth, I pressed the iron to the inside of my wrist. The pain was excruciating but brief. When I removed the tool, a small, smoldering symbol remained etched into my skin. As I returned to my place in the circle, something strange happened. The room seemed to spin, and a wave of dizziness washed over me. The fire in the background flickered, and for a moment I thought I saw something inside it, human shapes, writhing as if trapped in the flames. I closed my eyes, but the visions persisted. I saw faces, some familiar, others completely unknown, all whispering words I couldn't understand. When I opened my eyes again, the leader was staring directly at me, as if he knew exactly what I had just experienced. "You're bound now," he said, his voice softer, almost gentle. "There's no turning back." When the ceremony ended, everyone dispersed as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Rebecca drove me home without saying a word. In my apartment, I stared at the symbol on my wrist. It seemed smaller than I remembered, but still faintly pulsed as if alive. The visions from that night kept replaying in my mind, growing clearer with each recollection. I didn't fully understand what had happened, but I felt that something far greater was at play. Worse, I felt that I was now part of it, whether I wanted to be or not. No matter how much I tried to justify my choices as part of the path to success, something inside me was beginning to break. The doubts grew darker, the questions more troubling, and the certainty that there was no escape became stronger with each passing day. The nights following the binding ritual were long and sleepless. The symbol on my wrist still throbbed as though it had a life of its own, and the visions from that night haunted me relentlessly. The fire, the twisted shapes, the incomprehensible words. I tried to convince myself it was all the result of nerves, exhaustion, or maybe even the fasting. That was part of the ritual. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Rebecca became increasingly present, monitoring my every move, calling frequently to remind me of the rules or reinforce the importance of compliance. "You're doing well," she would say, but her tone wasn't one of praise. It was one of control. At one of these events, a script reading for a production in progress, I met Natasha. Natasha was a veteran actress, one of those faces everyone recognizes but who rarely occupies the spotlight. Her name was associated with iconic roles from decades past, but her career had seemed to cool off. She was there as a creative consultant, or so the organizers claimed. When our eyes met for the first time, something about her sent a chill down my spine. Later, during a break in the reading, Natasha approached me. "You're new here," she said in a low voice. "Yes, I'm just starting," I replied, trying to sound confident despite my hesitation. She tilted her head, studying my face with tired eyes. "You've done the ritual, haven't you?" Froze, my body stiffening. How did she know? "Don't worry, dear," she continued, sitting down beside me. "Everyone who goes through this circle has the same expression afterward. Confusion, fear, doubt. I've seen it all before." I didn't know how to respond. Natasha seemed to carry a mixture of compassion and exhaustion, as though she spoke from deep experience. "You think all this is about talent? About success?" She laughed softly, but there was no humor in her tone. "No, it's about control. They want to see how far you'll go, how much you're willing to sacrifice your morality, your humanity. Those who follow the rules survive. Those who don't." She trailed off, looking at her hands as if reliving something. "What happens to those who don't?" I asked, unable to contain my curiosity. "They disappear," she said. "Not in a dramatic way. There are no headlines, no investigations. They simply cease to exist." The room around us seemed to grow colder. Natasha glanced around, checking to see if anyone was watching us. "Listen to me, Jenna. You still have time. Get out while you can. This will consume you." Before I could respond, Natasha stood, adjusting her coat with trembling hands. "Believe me, the success isn't worth the price they demand." Then she walked away, leaving me alone with her words. The days that followed were a whirlwind of doubt. Was Natasha right? Was all of this just a sadistic game, a system designed to separate the obedient from the rebellious? Or was she simply a bitter woman, regretting the choices she had made? My desire to leave grew stronger every day. But then Rebecca appeared with a new offer. "Congratulations, Jenna," she said with that familiar cold smile. "They loved your dedication. You've been cast in Shadow's Fall. It's a supporting role, but it's a major production, a significant leap for your career." My heart raced. Shadow's Fall was a high-budget production with an all-star cast and a renowned director. It was exactly the kind of opportunity I'd dreamed of since arriving in Los Angeles. "When do we start?" I asked without hesitation. Rebecca's smile widened. "Soon. They want you to maintain your dedication. No distractions, no questions." She left before I could respond, leaving me alone with the script she'd placed on the table. For a moment, I felt the same spark of hope that had brought me here. This was my chance to change my life, to finally achieve everything I'd ever wanted. The weight of Natasha's words echoed in my mind like a haunting melody I couldn't ignore, yet the offer of a role in Shadow's Fall rekindled that spark of hope, as if all the terror might be worth it in the end. In that state of hesitation and confusion, Rebecca appeared again, summoning me to a meeting that, according to her, would determine my true place among Hollywood's elite. The hallways of the building where the meeting was to be held were long and silent, lined with dark marble that seemed to absorb the light. Rebecca walked beside me, her firm footsteps echoing off the floor. She didn't say a word the entire way, her expression more resolute than ever. "This is it," she said, stopping in front of a set of double doors. For a moment, I thought about turning around and running. With every step closer to the room, it felt as though I was walking into something I could never undo. When the doors opened, I was met with a scene that felt like it had been pulled from a fever dream. The room was enormous, adorned with symbols carved into dark stone walls. In the center was a large, circular structure made of a shimmering material that almost seemed alive. Surrounding it were figures I instantly recognized. Magazine cover stars, award-winning directors, industry moguls. All of them watched me in silence, like judges awaiting a verdict. In the center, seated on a high chair that resembled a throne, was Henry, the man who had hired me at Starlight. His cold smile reflected something far deeper and more sinister. "Welcome, Jenna," he said, spreading his arms as if greeting me into a home. I stood there, unsure of what to do or say. My eyes darted around the room, searching for clues about what was to come, but everyone remained still, like statues. "You've made it here because you've proven yourself worthy," Henry continued, rising from his seat. His voice was firm, each word heavy with an unsettling certainty. "Your choices, your determination, your resilience, all of it has been observed, evaluated, and you've passed." My stomach churned. Every humiliating moment, every absurd rule, every sacrifice I'd made, it had all been calculated. I wasn't just a hopeful actress trying to climb the ladder. I was an experiment, a pawn in a game far larger than I could have imagined. "Now we know you're capable of bearing the weight of fame," he said, stepping closer. "But the true sacrifice is yet to come." Henry extended his hand, gesturing for me to step toward the circle on the floor. As I did, the light in the room seemed to dim, focusing solely on that space. "There are 3 sacrifices that guarantee eternity at the top," he explained with the calmness of someone discussing the weather. 3 final trials that will transform you into something more than just a star. You will become an icon, an immortal name. I swallowed hard, unable to tear my gaze from his cold, unflinching eyes. "The first sacrifice," he continued, "is to bear a child for the cult. You will be paired with an actor of our choosing in a sacred ritual. That child, upon birth, will be offered to the circle, ensuring the continued success of our order." My eyes widened. "You want me to have a child and give it up?" "Yes," Henry replied without emotion. "That is the pact that keeps us strong." "This is insane," I murmured, but he continued as if he hadn't heard me. "The second sacrifice," he said, "is the life of the one you love most, a demonstration of your devotion to the circle. In your case, your father." My heart stopped. My father was the only one who still believed in me, who still sent messages of encouragement, even though I knew he had his doubts. "This is monstrous," I whispered, but my voice felt weak, lost in the oppressive weight of the room. Henry ignored my reaction. "And finally, the third sacrifice, your soul and the soul of the child, a direct pact with the King of Darkness, ensuring the power you gain is never challenged, never taken away." My body trembled. Every word he spoke seemed to strip something away from me. All the choices I had made, every rule I had followed, every humiliation I had endured. It had all led to this moment. "The choice is yours, Jenna," Henry said, stepping back toward his throne. "Accept, and you will have wealth, fame, and immortality. Refuse, and you will disappear, like all the others who failed to understand what it takes to survive in this world." I looked at Rebecca, standing silently by the door. There was no sympathy in her gaze, only a neutral expression, as though she already knew what my answer would be. I wanted to say no. I wanted to leave that room and never look back. But at the same time, refusing outright felt like signing my own death warrant. "I need time to think," I said, my voice faltering. Henry smiled. "You have until the next full moon. But remember, hesitation is seen as weakness." I left the room feeling as though I had left a part of myself behind. The symbol on my wrist burned hotter than ever, a constant reminder of the path I'd already taken. When I got home after that meeting, something inside me broke. It was as though an invisible barrier had collapsed, unleashing all my emotions, fears, and regrets at once. I thought about Henry's words, Rebecca's cruel smile, the hungry gleam in the eyes of those who had been in that room. I thought about the price they wanted me to pay, a price that crossed every line I'd ever thought I could endure. It was too much. I couldn't go on. No matter what was at stake, my life, my father, and above all, my soul, were not bargaining chips. That silent night, while the world slept, I made my decision. I would run. The first thing I did was erase my tracks. I burned documents that linked my name to the circle and the agency. I sold all my belongings of value but made sure nothing seemed suspicious. I deactivated my social media accounts, deleted my phone number, and wiped my computer clean. Every move had to be calculated. Any mistake could cost me my life. Then, I sought out Natasha. I didn't know if I could trust her, but something in her tired expression and regret-laden voice made me believe she was the only person who could help. Me? We met in an empty parking lot late at night. She wore dark sunglasses even in the shadows, as if expecting to be followed at any moment. "I knew you'd come," she said bluntly. I told her what I had decided and begged for her help. Natasha listened carefully, and when I finished, she simply nodded. "You're doing what I should have done years ago," Natasha said, handing me a folder. Inside were a fake passport and a plane ticket. "This is for tomorrow night. You'll take a bus to the airport, board this flight, and never look back." "And you?" I asked. Natasha gave me a sad smile. "Don't worry about me. They've already forgotten me. It's too late for me, but not for you." The next night, with only a backpack slung over my shoulder, I began my escape. Every step felt like a battle against fear. I glanced over my shoulder at every corner, convinced I was being followed, but there was no time to hesitate. At the bus terminal, I noticed a man who seemed familiar. He stood near a vending machine, his gaze too fixed, his movements too calculated. Had Rebecca sent someone? My instinct screamed at me to run, but I forced my body to move slowly, as if everything was normal. When the bus arrived, I boarded quickly and sat in the back, my heart racing. The man didn't follow me onto the bus, but the fear lingered. Finally, I arrived at the airport. The wait for the flight felt like one of the longest moments of my life. When the plane took off, I experienced my first true sense of relief. I was leaving everything behind: the agency, the circle, Hollywood. Along with it, I was abandoning my career, my dream, even my own name. My destination was a remote place, a village nestled in the mountains where no one cared about celebrities or fame. There, I could start over. I could simply be Alice, the fake name on the passport Natasha had given me. But even in that isolated place, the nightmares continued. I dreamed of the faces of the people I had destroyed, of Natasha's hollow gaze, of Henry's ever-present, ever-threatening smile. To cope with the trauma, I began to write. I found an old notebook and scribbled the first line in my journal. Fame demands sacrifices no human should ever have to make. This is the truth they don't want you to know. With every word I wrote, I felt like I was reclaiming a piece of myself. I knew I needed to expose the dark side of Hollywood, but I also knew the circle wouldn't let me go so easily. So I lived in the shadows, always looking over my shoulder, always waiting for the night when Rebecca or someone like her would knock on my door. But even so, I decided to keep writing. If they ever found me, at least the world would know the truth. And that was the only revenge I had left.